Thank you very much for doing this. This book of stories, Blank Pages and Other Stories, the stories are perfect. In other words, if you study them carefully, sentence by sentence, the structure, the whole way one sentence does one thing, and the next sentence moves slightly away from that, just tonally, and I think also thematically, that there's a sense of something just perfectly made. But I suppose what I want to start by saying is perfection good enough? In other words, that what's lovely sometimes in the stories is ways in which the characters behave out of character. Someone does the least likely thing you imagine they're going to do. Or else, if a story, just say, is 100 details, and you need to get the 100 details absolutely accurate and absolutely right. What I notice in these stories is in the middle of the story, there's one detail that you particularly work on that seems to me to have a particular sort of resonance. I'm talking about the way if you have flowers you've bought in a garage and you have them by the sound of the cellophane, how that sound will come. Or if you just look at how a cigarette can be dealt with, the whole way an ashtray is described. What I'm talking about, it, I suppose, is a sort of idea of the image itself, of capturing a sort of accuracy, deep accuracy in the way things are in the world. For example, this is about an ashtray. Dr. Irving, they don't smoke, so they have to send the maid to get an ashtray. The ashtray arrives. It took some time before the maid found one. It was a freebie Dr. Irving had got at a medical conference, advertising Player's Navy Cut. Now, listen to this. You wrote this. At each corner, there was a small indentation to rest your cigarette. Right, but that's, yeah, absolutely, we know what that is. And then the next one, Myrtle kept tapping hers, sometimes sharpening the ash against the rim. And obviously this doesn't add to our sense of character. It doesn't add to our sense of plot. It stops time for a moment. But in stopping time, then it opens our imagination to actually seeing the object. And so that the story, while the story doesn't depend on this moment, yet somehow or other, there's a shiver in this moment, which the story lifts in some way or turns in some way. And I suppose the question is, how much does this matter to you, this idea of finding an object you can work with in this way?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. But the difficulty is that I've always found that you want to write vividly. And so if you capture a detail like this and the reader reads it and is convinced by it, then we make a kind of silent move to what is spiritual or what is human, and that they believe the sensual world that you have described, and therefore they take it that what you're talking about their character is also there within that description. I kind of, when you mentioned that there was a thing in the novel before that was Midwinter Break, and the couple who have been married for forever and ever go on a weekend to Amsterdam, and the wife has bought a pair of pajamas and in Marks and Spencer's, and unwraps the cellophane and bundles it up and puts it in the wastepaper basket. And the sound is described of the polythene or whatever cellophane tries to reform itself with the crackle as it goes back. And I suppose at some very deep level, that's what these characters are doing, the husband and the wife, that they're reforming or trying to shape themselves in this dilemma that they're going to suffer throughout the whole holiday of 3 or 4 days. I think it adds a kind of depth. There are things that just come up as you're writing. And you say, it's not so much that I wanted to put that in, is that I want to leave that in there because it's working. There was somebody was asking me lately about the idea of what writing is about, that what it can be compared to. And I was likening it to breastfeeding. That what happens in breastfeeding, it seems, is that the baby feeds upon the breast and produces the milk. And a writer sits down at his desk and begins writing words, and that produces the story or the imagery. And he gets that, and he continues to write, and it continues to provide milk and story slash. So that those people who would say plan elaborately, I don't think work in the same way as those people who sit down and start to write and say, yes, that actually works at the bottom of that paragraph. We're going to leave that.
There are things that really interest you. There's an earlier story of yours that I really admire, as you know, I think it's called Still Life. Mm-hmm. And it is the one about a young man whose father fights with him over staying up late doing his paintings and painting on glass. Mm-hmm. And then he finds at the end of his father's life, he finds himself at the bedside and he's doing a drawing.
Yes.
And if anyone were to ask, that is one of your subjects. And in a way, it's a metaphor for writing itself. That in other words, as you say, the other person is producing the energy. And you are simply working as hard as you can to capture some of that energy from life. Mm-hmm. And the life can pass you by. And in other words, someone can fade away in that time, but you're still working. And so I think in two of these stories, the one about the death mask and the one about Egon Schiele, the whole idea of an artist or someone working with death, with someone fading away, with creating a memorial around death, that these are things that really, really interest you fundamentally. And it's lovely seeing them coming up again. You having another go, turning them around another way to see if they're working. But I think the first thing I think they are, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a sort of way of writing about writing without writing directly about it. And the other thing is the actual drama itself really interests you. How you can get energy from that interaction.
It's interesting, the one about the death mask. I suppose that one began, if you think of what origins, where did it come from? I had read somewhere and was interested in the James Joyce death mask, and that somewhere there was a footnote which said there were two death masks. And I thought and tried to begin writing that, but it was too much research and it wasn't right. But I liked the idea of the death mask. I liked the idea that it was a woman who was awakened or roused in the evening and sent out to do something because the sculptor who was to do it has dropped a huge kind of oxygen cylinder onto his foot, and that one detail leads to another, and it's convincing in some way that you're surprised at that. What is she doing? That's the other thing, is that if you begin describing what is going on in the story, instead of a kind of a plot, people are saying, what is she doing? Why is she getting that stuff out of the cupboard? Where is she going? These are all kind of narrative points that the reader wants to have solved, and to have the satisfaction of those being solved. But you don't always do that. Sometimes what you leave out is as important. And that woman coming back in early morning, I had thought of that one as an Edinburgh story. I don't know why, but it's interesting. It's in the past. And there are some things I want solved about that story.
Yeah, I thought it was an Edinburgh story because of the views, the vistas, and the way the buildings were described, and the way the hills were done. And
Yes,
it
yes.
was also, there's a lovely little moment where there's a possibility news that another European war is coming. So you
Mm,
realize this is the 1930s.
yes, yes, yes. And
And
the genius who would have his face done in a face mask, you know, there were plenty of them around Edinburgh to have that kind of reputation, you know.
I, yeah, we're talking. I was just going on there about the 30s. One of the things that's I think not directly in the book is a story directly about the Troubles. But what you're
Mm,
doing is you're going back to an earlier trouble, which is the Second World War, which
yes.
is, of course, we know about how the North handles the First World War. We know about the Troubles, but that middle bit we have in what, one or two Brian Moore novels. But the Second World War, the bombing of Belfast. But in these two stories, the first and the last story in the book, you find what Henry James talks about when he writes his early stories set in the American Civil War. I'm not writing about the battlefield. I'm writing about another part of the field. I'm writing about what he calls the reverse side of the picture. In other words, those who stayed at home during a war.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I just talking about perfection, and just that first sentence, the first paragraph of A Love Picture, that first story, she set the egg in its egg cup. No sooner had she sat down than she had to get up and go to the kitchen for a spoon. There was a step down which she took in her stride. The small apostle spoon she used for eating an egg from its shell was in the cutlery drawer, and she rattled around it until she found it. First thing is, of course, that I'm seeing a Seamus Heaney poem, the description of domestic space, the sort of capturing a sort of Vermeer moment.
Yes.
I will describe how the egg cup was, which Catherine Mansfield talks about. I will tell you how the laundry basket squeaked.
That's right.
And
Yes.
but what you're doing in the story is finding a very unusual dream, a very unusual drama. I just wonder if you could give us some help. I mean, how did the story come?
Well, that one was it was a way for me to write about my family. That when I was growing up, I realized that my father, who was an artist, he was a painter. He was a commercial artist. He called himself, doing adverts for charities and the YP pools, publishing them in the papers. He illustrated a Bible for schools and things like that. But as his main money-making job, when he came out from the tech in Belfast, was to be the manager of a cinema, the Capital Cinema on the Antrim Road in Belfast. And when he was given a job by the Curran brothers, who owned the cinema, the secretary was typing up the details, and she typed MC instead of MAC. And my father went over and said, you've spelt that wrongly. And she changed it, and then they got married. So that was a way of me writing about my family, but not writing about them. That there was a cousin of his, Uncle Huey, he was called, and he was the projectionist. And there were things that came into our house, and this was just after the war, I presume. And there was cuts of carpet come from the Capital Cinema, taken out and laid on our stairway. And as a child, you're very close to the stairway when you're playing on it and looking down at this very heavily ornate and patterned carpet, I could see cigarette burns all through it. And this was an evidence of poverty in our house until we were able to buy a new carpet. And the meeting of the man and the woman in this story, A Love Picture, is a kind of a nod to that, that she is a widow, and it's a technological story as well, that we work with emails and all this sort of stuff. But in those days, it was wonderful to go to the pictures or go to the cinema and see the newsreel and something on the newsreel that was happened like 2 days ago or 3 days ago. So all these kind of wee themes intermesh and make that story something that I have created out of my life, but obliquely. As who was the woman who said, tell it slant, Emily Dickinson, tell it slant. And that was what that story was about. And it was an interesting story to write and to create, and moving in a way. I mean, the idea of all that stuff that you used to have an armband in mourning. She thinks in the story, everybody's read the story in the group, that the son has died, been lost at sea, and people in those days wore this black armband, and the. Well, what was I was on a track there now, but I've lost the thread of where I was going with that. But yes, that she wonders, being so self-conscious, that would it be right for her to wear perfume? Is that the same as wearing an elaborate dress or a colorful dress when she should be in mourning? Would the woman who lives 2 doors down know that she was wearing perfume, and what a cheap trollop she might be? Or so the
you do this. I mean, in the story, when it comes to the perfume side, you're very careful. You actually choose the perfume. You have exactly how she sprays it, the whole business. It becomes a sort of image on its own, the story. But just as the egg cup does.
Yeah, but that was because my Aunt Sissy had one of those things, a puffer. I don't know what you actually call them, but it's like a thing that sits on a dressing table, and it has a wee rubber thing that you puff out, the atomizer. I think it was called.
You use the word you use actually is atomizer. And stop me for a second. And an atomizer. I think I know what that is.
So yeah, those things. Once you have witnessed as a child, the writing is about the intensity of recall of your things of your childhood. It was a Graham Greene that said that everything important has happened to a writer before he's 18. That as the things that you remember from childhood, that Aunt Sissy's wee atomizer.
Bernard, if I don't ask you this question, I'm going to really kick myself afterwards. It's such a detail, but I need to know it. Now, twice in the book, in the first story and also in the story called Searching, you use the phrase "Christ tonight" or Jesus Christ tonight. Now, this is pure Enniscorthy where I'm from. People would say, "Oh, Jesus Christ tonight," but I always thought it was tonight. I've never seen it written down before, but it's really part of speech, and it was part of the speech of my childhood. "Oh Lord, tonight, did you ever see anything? Oh Lord, tonight." Now, I thought it was tonight. You think it's Christ the night, and you're probably right. But how do you know?
Sorry, I've just lost that.
How do you know that it's Christ the night rather than Christ tonight?
I have no idea. Well, it's in my house. That's in my house. My words go. There were lots of other things like that too.
Right.
The way, the
Yeah.
eccentricities of people talking. That Aunt Mary, who the father who was the cinema person, brought his my mother's grandmother and grandfather and great aunt to live with us in the house after the war. And these people just talked, and they talked about various things. And I would listen as a child, and you could hear, you couldn't quote them, but you could hear the rhythm of the voice, the intensity of the speech, all of that, and the things that they talked about. I remember them eating sliced orange sandwiches, which is
I believe you.
this is true. They sliced them very, very thinly, and they would put them between white bread, and they would eat them, and then they would say, "I wonder, does the Queen have sandwiches?" And these were Catholic people wondering about the Queen. The Queen was an interest in their lives, and they marveled at the Queen. But they were Republicans.
Can I just move on to ask you about the very last story, which I have to say, I found it so tense that I had to look ahead to make sure that something was going to work out, because I was so worried that it wasn't, that they were just going to sit for the evening, the two doctors, eating, drinking, and talking, and that the other story, the story we're actually watching. So what you have to do is set up two stories that are almost in opposition to each other. The two very privileged gentlemen and the man who's really poverty-stricken. Mm-hmm. And you put them, you have to have us conscious of one while the other is happening. So technically, it's quite a difficult thing to do, but you also have to do something very interesting. You make the two men, the two doctors, the American doctor, the Irish doctor, extremely bigoted people.
Yes.
And where the reader goes, you didn't just say what you just said about Roman Catholics or about African Americans, and they do. But then they become very good men in other ways. So the drama is the ambiguities within them, as much as the drama between the two strands. I think it's an extraordinary story. I have to say, I really found it so satisfying, so brilliantly done. I wonder if you could give us some background to it.
Well, that again is there's a beginning in reality to it. That my wife Madeline was from a place in County Derry, and she remembers as a child the first African American soldier coming there during the war, that she saw this guy in the back of a truck, and that was interesting in a way. And the other thing was that she said that there was a story that somebody had been. Their life had been saved by this new drug, penicillin. And I, when writing that story, I'd say that to my own GP. I was visiting him and he said, "Oh yeah, there are lots of those stories." So it didn't matter. Maybe I would create my own story out of that. The other thing was that Madeline's father was a man who would go out and cut sticks from the hedges. That was a kind of hobby of his, that he would make blackthorn sticks and hang them with weights and soak them and make them straight and all the rest of it. And he would get a few bob from that, or give them away, as in this case. So it also is interesting in the way too that when the two sticks are handed over to the two doctors, their embarrassed kind of play is one of them is kind of looking at it as if it's a rifle or an armament of some sort, and the other's like a stick under the arm of imperialism, or so. Those details, I think they all work, and the one that is not explored is that the guy who is the American may well be a Catholic.
He has to be a Catholic, doesn't he? I mean, he says, I'm a Pole. Yeah, and his mother's name is Irish. I'm presuming all along that just because he's American, they just don't imagine he could be a Roman Catholic, and that's part of his shock. But he has his own bigotry, so it's not as
totally, yes. And many times I've heard that comparison made that that the civil rights movement were like the African Americans. To be under unionist regime is to be like an African American in America.
Yeah. Bernard, when we started talking about fiction first, it was about 1980, and we were young, and now things have changed. I don't know what's happened, but you have become one of the great investigators and explorers of what late middle age into old age has become in Midwinter Break and in some of these stories. It seems to me for you it's a very rich thing to explore, the whole idea of fading, of a body that's fading, a memory that might be going, a memory that might be brilliantly good at some things, loneliness, solitude, living alone when you're old. These are great subjects for fiction.
And they're what you approach as you come out of your middle age period and go into the octogeneric. What is it? 80s. That you're looking back and you're sort of saying, "Oh my God, things are getting serious now. We're not going to be around for." I remember as a writer, I don't earn very much, but I remember going out and buying. I had run out of the big red book that you do your taxes in, and you put them all in columns, and put it. I had run out of one of these. They last you about 10, 7, 8 years, and you make your returns on those. And I remember thumbing these books in a shop saying, now I wonder, can I take a 5-year one or a 10-year one? See what money I can save on this. And I think I must have been filled with optimism that day, and I bought a 10-year one a long time ago. But that you realize that being raised as a Catholic and finding Catholicism of such interest through all its pomp and circumstance and all that, and then the period when you reject it, and it's not really the way the world is, and you're now in a period where inevitably death is going to come, like the old Queen eventually went, and we now have a king. But it's such a wonderful gift. So when you think about these things, then you try to write them in a way. You try to grapple with them, and the sadness that exists, that mother in the home of her being somebody who is in middle age, is completely stylish and would go to a school sports day in high heels and a kind of wee net thing over her hat, and then to be found walking the streets in a crocodile with a T-shirt with gold lame on it, and and flat-heeled shoes. It shows such a sadness, the way people have let themselves go, as my mother would have said. Don't let yourself.
There's one, just before we take questions from the other readers, there's one story that I wonder if you could just gloss for us a bit, and it seems to me to be a COVID story, and it's the story called The End of Days, and it's that during the COVID pandemic, we look back at the 1918 flu and the epidemic and the extraordinary figure, the numbers of people who died in that. Yes. And one of the great figures who died, who you feel is such a tragedy, is the Austrian painter Egon Schiele, who made these extraordinary elongated, beautifully made figures with a lot of little colors, but really extraordinary original in what he was doing as an artist. And he was very, very young, and himself and his wife both died of influenza in the 1918. They were among the most sort of, I suppose, the victims where you really could see a life ahead for him as an artist that was cut short in the pandemic. So the story, The End of Days, is the story of what happened to him in 1918.
Yes, yeah. Again, I had been in Vienna, and I thought of those things, and I felt that I should address that COVID strand somehow or other. I had most of these stories written, and then I got a Robert Louis Stevenson fellowship to go to France to finish and tidy the collection, and I still felt there was a hole in it that I hadn't written about anything to do with COVID, because COVID hadn't arrived. And then I thought I really should address that in some way. I had been really interested in Egon Schiele ever since. I remember going to my Auntie Sissy's house, which was just across the street, and going in there. And one of the habits that you had was to go in there and look under the cushions to see what the magazines were. They would be tidied away underneath the cushion. And I remember Time magazine, I think it was, or Newsweek, I think it was Time, had a kind of art column, and there were wee tiny drawings or tiny paintings, and that really interested me. And there was one of them had drawings by Egon Schiele in it, and they were explosive. I thought they were just terrific. And it was years later before I saw them at full size, or what he was trying to do, that energy that he has about the human body. He had some kind of different habits, particularly with young people, but it seems that in Vienna at that time, very young people were sexually aware or were becoming involved in sex, and that he ended up in court, and he did a number of days in jail. And I kind of wondered how I could write this story, how this story was that the two people involved, or the 2.5 people involved, were going to die. And they're in the middle of COVID. This was happening all around us, and it was something that was worth exploring. It's a dark side, but there's an energy too about an artist like that. And I had long wanted to write about him, and that was the way that it came about. And it's a serious and dark story. It also, if there's any structure in the book, the story at the beginning, the love picture, is about a resurrection of sorts, and the story at the end is about a resurrection of a different sort, and the story in the middle is of where they don't win, they die. And it's almost like a hammock, that the shape of it. So for all of those reasons, for the artistic reasons, the historical reasons, that story got written.
Bernard, thank you
Okay.
very much. That was great. It's really great to see you.
Okay.